Hi, Shalom. Many of us, when we think about the war years of World War II and the terrible impact it had upon our people, we think mostly about the Jews of Europe, but we forget that the Nazi Germany spread out all the way through and including North Africa. And our Sephardic brethren were equally felt the harshness of this evil person. And though the numbers do not equal, one Jew is an entire world. In any case, in North Africa, there's Tunisia, which was a site of some major battles, and there's a very small island off Tunisia called Jerba. And Jerba had a vibrant, though small, but very vibrant Jewish community, and it was led by a very powerful spiritual leader, Chacham Machluf, let me just make sure, Eidan, Machluf Eidan. And this Chacham, he was very much involved with the life of his people. He cared about their physical, he cared about their spiritual, he cared about their moral, he cared about their ethical. And one day he's walking down the street, and it's in one of these crowded streets in North Africa. There are a lot of street vendors, and the kids are running and darting in to and fro. And as he's walking towards the synagogue, he happens to overhear one Jewish kid who's fighting with his friend, and the Jewish kid, I'll call him Baruch, opens up his mouth and curses. May God do this and this to you. And he mentioned also a vulgarity. The Chacham, who was truly a pure individual, heard it and was completely shocked. How could a child, maybe 10 years old or so, speak like that? So instead of going to the synagogue, he actually diverted his path, walked through the crowded streets, and people, when they noticed who it was, quickly made room for him until he came to the boy. And he asked the boy very sternly, "Who are you? What's your name? What's your father's name?" The boy, to tell you the truth, was a little bit overawed, could barely stammer, and the rabbi had to get it out of him. "Tell me your name and your father's name." When he got the name and the father's name, the rabbi continued on his path to the synagogue. But when he came there, he quickly dispatched one of his emissaries to bring the father. The father was in the middle of work. He actually had to close his store, or perhaps it was just a stand for a good couple of moments. He had to run to the synagogue. "The rabbi wants me. What is it?" And the rabbi said, "I heard with my own ears the way your child was speaking. He mentioned the vulgarity and he cursed. How is it possible for a child, a 10-year-old, to pick up such language? Something tells me that something is not right in your home." And of course, the father began to feebly explain, "Well, it's not my fault. We never speak like that in our house. He must have picked it up from the gutter." And the Chacham was very adamant. Your job as a parent is to make sure that your children are being educated properly, and they don't come home with gutter language. And the fact that a person could actually curse a fellow Jew, that's a sign that there's something terrible that lies within the soul. And what is inside of the soul, hidden, becomes revealed through speech. And he actually gave Musar to the father. It's your obligation. There's something not right with you. You should have to do more teshuvah, return to Hashem. And finally, he ended off by saying, your atonement cannot be completed unless you pay a hefty fine, and you will give it to the yeshiva, the children's school, which are educating Jewish children. And he put a very large sum, and the father called the son home, gave him that large sum, and told him, "Go to Yeshiva Or HaTorah and get a receipt. And when you come home after that, we have some talking to do." Of course, the son by this time understood, put two and two together, that he had spoken completely inappropriately, ran to the yeshiva, gave the fine. They gave him a receipt. As he's walking back towards his father, it occurs to him that maybe he should first go to the rabbi to apologize and to say that he did not mean it. And indeed, he went to the rabbi. This time, when he came into the rabbi, he was treated very differently. Instead of a stern, unforgiving teacher, the rabbi literally embraced him and hugged him, kissed him, and said, "My dear child, you're a very, very precious Jew. Never forget the power of speech." And then he said, "Though you sinned with your mouth, but now that you have paid a fine to the synagogue and you've resolved never to say such terrible things again, you're a Baal Teshuvah, you're a penitent. And a penitent's even greater than a tzaddik." And he, not only did he undo the damage, but he sort of propped up the child and gave him a new perspective that from now onwards he will be much better. Before the child left, the rabbi blessed him and said, "By the way, hold on to the receipt. You'll never know when it can come into good usage." Well, the child went home. Many, many years passed. The Second World War started. The father was elderly, and the child now was a young man. And during the occupation under Germany, they started to put down restrictions. Of course, there wasn't with the same severity of Poland, but there were many restrictions, and Jews were told to identify themselves with a mark on their clothing. And essentially, the Germans/Nazis were looking for excuses to arrest Jews. Once they arrested them legally, no one knew where it would lead. Many times they were deported or disappeared, and no one knew where they went to. So the goal was to avoid antagonizing or even meeting a German patrol. During these years, when Germany was in charge of Jerba, there was very difficult to get food, and much of the food was rationed. And Chacham Machluf, who was now an elderly rabbi, the leader of the community, realized that the community used to have a soup kitchen, and they needed actually to make bread, and they were running low on flour. So he called for a group of his fellow Jews to go to one of the places in Jerba where they would buy wheat, bring it back, and then they would actually do the grinding in the Jewish community, and they would, of course, use it for the community's baking of bread or pita. So this large group of Jews leave, and they go to somewhere in Jerba where they buy the wheat, and on their way back, they have the misfortune of meeting a German patrol. This German patrol was looking to start up with them, and they immediately forced them to halt. And one of the officers comes over with a lot of bluster, and he says, "You're transporting food. This is under military occupation. Where is your permit? Do you have permission to take food from one part of the island to the second part?" And of course, they never heard of this regulation, or if they did, there was no way for them to get that. And they began to stammer, and quietly they were expecting the worst. And the German, seeing that he has some legal pretext, it's all fabricated, of course, was already planning something terrible. And suddenly, as the Jews are standing there, and the German is conferring in italics with some of his superiors on the phone, the boy who many years ago had been sent to the yeshiva to pay a fine remembered that he actually had that receipt with him, because when the rabbi told him, "Hold on to it, you'll never know when you could use it," he considered the rabbi a holy man and considered that walking around with this receipt would actually be some type of a segula, some type of a charm. So he figured, what do I got to lose? And he opened up his wallet and he took out a paper that only had Hebrew writing on it with a little bit of Arabic on the top. And essentially it was a receipt saying that we received X amount of money from you. And he comes over in front of this German and he says, I just found our official permission. And he shows it to the German, who obviously can't read Hebrew, nor can he read Arabic. And he just looks at the paper, and he looks at the Jew, and he shrugs his shoulders as well. Let me not catch you again. And he let them go. And of course, this is one of the many untold miracles, which now you know, of the war. I tell you this story because it emphasizes to me what it means to be a spiritual leader, to be involved with your people, that if you hear children saying things inappropriate, we don't just say, well, they picked it up, but they don't really mean it. They don't even understand what they're saying. Rather, in his time and in his place, Chacham Machluf understood that it is the job of a home to insulate a child and to protect the child from the outside. So we could talk about that. We could also talk about how he changed from being that stern lawgiver to a warm, embracing father figure, encouraging the child that now that he has repented, he's now become a greater person even than Novi Tzaddik. And of course, the most obvious, a receipt for charity can open up doors and save lives. And that's what I want to leave with you in particular. Many of us spend a lot of time in our life looking for a piece of paper. All of us know the importance of an admission slip, whether it be to a college, whether it be to a hospital, whether it be to a doctor's office, or whether it be even to a concert. Sometimes just a receipt gets you where you want to go. We often don't understand the power of righteousness in terms of charity. We all know we spend so much money on taxes and so much money on necessary things and so much money on entertainment. Okay, and we also spend money by giving charity to a synagogue, to an old age home, to a house of study. Sometimes it's that piece of paper which is far more important than other pieces of paper that we spend so much time on. During the new year, we are taught that God looks at each and every one of us and judges us. Sometimes all it takes is a piece of paper, a receipt, to sway the heavenly judgment from negative to positive. I encourage you to continue in your good deeds, and I especially encourage you to increase in your charity in the next couple of weeks before the coming of the new year. Let's hope and pray that we will all be written and inscribed for a very happy, healthy, and prosperous new year. Amen.